Greg joined us a few months ago through our acquisition of a bot detection firm called Swarm. He was founder and CEO. Today, he's going to give us a deep dive into fraud. And with all that said, Greg, go ahead.
I'm going to be talking to you about ad fraud. And before we go too deep into the subject, I want to answer why fraudsters actually target online advertising. So I want you to put yourself in the mind of a criminal. And for this thought experiment, assume you're equally good at every single criminal endeavor. Like you're equally good at robbing banks, trafficking drugs, or committing ad fraud or other cybercrime. Why would you choose ad fraud? The reason is the payout is very large. Fraudsters make in the billions from ad fraud. The second reason is there are no scaling issues. If you are stealing cars, you need to consistently find good cars to steal. If you're trafficking drugs, you need to find a drug supply. With ad fraud, you have to think of it as a money tree for cyber criminals. As soon as they start generating traffic and getting paid out for fraudulent traffic, they can keep doing that infinitely, basically based on the technical limits of their botnet. That is their only constraint on revenue. The other reason that fraudsters target online advertising is because online advertising fraud has limited risk of penalty. If you're involved in organized crime, if you're involved in theft, there's the likelihood that other criminals will endanger your life. There's the likelihood that you will be prosecuted. In many cases, ad fraud falls in the gray area in various jurisdictions, and it is very difficult to prosecute fraudsters. So as you see on this chart, ad fraud has very high payout and very low risk. And that's why fraudsters will continually target online advertising. Part of the problem, or the reason that the ad industry has enabled fraud to become a big problem, is that historically, rather than measuring brand lift or conversions, we've been looking at the wrong metrics. We've been using things like click-through rate or time spent on page as a proxy for effective advertising. And the problem with all of these types of behavioral metrics is that they're very easy to game. So, for example, we used to optimize ads. I worked at DSPs. We used to optimize ads towards click-through rate. What happened? The bots started clicking more than humans. And now, high click-through rate is probably correlated more strongly with non-human traffic than actual human engagement with your ads. The same will also occur with any behavioral metrics like hover rate or scroll depth in the future. These metrics are this type of activity and behavior on page is very easy for bots to generate. And so what happens is, as soon as we start buying ads or valuing ads more, paying more for ads because of these types of behavioral metrics, this incentivizes bots to keep doing this cycle and keep generating this type of activity. So we think you need to actually identify non-human traffic rather than looking at these behavioral metrics and actually measure brand lift and conversion. The impact of all of this varies from country to country. The reason on this, here you see that the United States has the highest fraud rate is because the United States has the largest ad market. It also generally has the highest CPC and CPM payouts. For this reason, fraudsters target the US market. Overall, the impact is estimated to be in the billions. IAB and Ernst & Young say it's 4.6 billion due to ad fraud and non-human traffic. In reality, every single study that attempts to quantify the losses from advertising fraud is really trying to extrapolate based on a small sample of US advertisers. Other estimates are closer to 10 billion. Other estimates are 3 billion. Suffice it to say, the scale of advertising fraud is very large, and if you are buying ads at scale, you are affected. Fortunately, the industry has started to unite in a fight against fraud. So starting last year, the MRC, the Media Ratings Council, started certifying vendors for invalid traffic detection. Then also, the Trustworthy Accountability Group has started certifying various ad vendors as well for anti-fraud certification. There's two categories that the MRC has defined for invalid traffic. There's general invalid traffic, and this primarily includes bots that are, for example, search engine crawlers, known bots, basically, bots that are not pretending to be humans, as well as traffic from data centers, right? Humans aren't browsing the internet from IP addresses associated with Amazon Web Services hosting. Sophisticated invalid traffic involves a lot more, generally more sophisticated, as the name indicates, of bot traffic. And can also include, and so these would be bots that attempt to act like a human. They might generate some behavior on page. It could also include, with sophisticated invalid traffic, it can also include hijacked devices. So there might be malware running on a phone and making ad requests. This also includes location fraud and other types of categories of fraud that we'll get into soon. So when we think about ad fraud, the first thing that comes to mind is bots. And we have to think beyond just bot traffic and non-human traffic when we're thinking about advertising fraud. Fraudsters keep coming up with new schemes for making money. And so we need to expand this definition. While bots aren't all of fraud, they are pretty much the largest category of fraudulent traffic is bots. And what we mean by that is non-human users viewing ads. And we have to distinguish between bots that commit ad fraud and normal bots, right? In the software world, bots are used for many purposes that are not necessarily nefarious. You wouldn't be able to get Google search engine results if bots didn't crawl the entirety of the internet to crawl content for Google search listings. What distinguishes malicious bots is that they are also generating automated actions on a web page, such as moving a mouse. They are also clicking on ads and viewing on ads deliberately. They're actually traversing the web and viewing websites in a way to generate money from fraud. Bots actually come about, or the way that a bot is created, is not what you think. It's not someone writing a script and deploying it on a server, and then that server goes and clicks on ads. What actually happens is that malware is loaded onto the computer, and that could be URI's computer. And the way that malware gets loaded onto the computer is through one of three methods. Traditionally, Flash exploits. So basically, there are security vulnerabilities within Flash and the implementation in a web browser. And historically, this was such a security pain point that this is part of the reason that Google has eliminated Flash from ad creative. Ad creative was being used to deliver malware that would hijack a user's computer. The other methods that are used for getting malware onto a computer to make it part of a botnet include browser exploits. So these would be security vulnerabilities within the browser. And these are gradually being patched, and this is the reason why open source frameworks like Chrome's open source framework is WebKit, Firefox relies on Gecko. These open source frameworks are increasingly being more secure. So fortunately, there's less browser exploits out there. And the third method is just tricking the user into downloading software. So often this will be game websites, or if you see websites that claim to have, for example, a pirated version of Photoshop, right? That pirated version of Photoshop might actually come with malware payload attached to it. So the reason that fraudsters actually like having a giant network of computers, or a botnet, a network of computers they've hijacked, the reason for this is that they want the unique IP addresses associated with each computer. So if a fraudster was trying to generate traffic from servers, from data centers, that would be very easily able to identify, because the IP blocks for those servers are registered with organizations that are internet service providers, they're hosting providers. If someone is trying to send spam or fraudulent traffic from an IP address owned by Amazon Web Services, owned by DigitalOcean, it's obvious for anyone to detect. So the reason botnet operators want to hijack you and I's computer is because we have a unique IP address. We have an IP address associated on our phone with Verizon or AT&T. On our home computer or office computer, it's associated with an internet service provider. So botnets are used for things other than just advertising fraud. This includes scraping content. They're also used for online banking fraud. In this particular case, botnet software can both steal credit card information from a user by implementing keyloggers on an infected computer, as well as send bots to go transfer money or commit fraudulent transactions using those credentials. One of the biggest ways that botnets make money, so just to back up a second, in a lot of cases, the botnet operators are only renting out this army of zombie computers. And so one of the most lucrative sources of revenue is obviously online advertising fraud. Of the second most lucrative would probably be distributed denial of service attacks. So if you go to Russian hacker underground forums or various underground forums, you can actually rent a botnet, and you can launch a distributed denial of service attack to take down a website. So distributed denial of service attacks are basically where a network of computers will make millions and millions of requests to a particular server in order to try to bring it down. So let's talk about ad fraud and fraudulent traffic. So this is a sort of step-by-step diagram here. First, hackers use code to create fraudulent traffic on an infected computer. The user might user is basically tricked, or a browser exploit loads these bot engines on their computer. And then the bots, they don't actually go and visit websites and click on ads right away. The sophisticated bots actually develop a web viewing history akin to a normal user. So this is the reason bots visit the Wall Street Journal or The Economist or The Onion. They want to seem like a normal user. Also, these bots will, in a lot of cases, go to e-commerce websites in order to acquire retargeting cookies. The reason they do this is to be shown higher value ads that have a better CPM payout when they go and view ads. Now, then, once these bots acquire a valuable cookie history, they then go visit a website and view and click on ads. And remember what I said, that this is a rental platform. So in most cases, the botnet operator is actually being paid by a fraudulent publisher. In some cases, that fraudulent publisher might be buying bot traffic unknowingly. So there might be traffic sellers or traffic sources that have a mix of human and bot traffic. The botnet operator gets paid because they get paid for the traffic they generate. In some cases, you see botnet software that has been written specifically for the creation for the purpose of generating fraudulent ad traffic. And these botnets, or the development of that type of software, indicates that there may be vertical integration in some cases, right? The spammy publisher may also be the botnet operator in some cases, and they may have a degree of efficiency over the rental model. So now we're going to talk about one type of bot, one of these sophisticated bots called verrine. So what's unique about verrine is that instead of generating a cookie history, it uses IE and Chrome that are installed on the computer, therefore taking advantage of the cookie history of the user whose computer was infected. So this is verrine controlling Chrome. And here, it's actually searching for links to click on the page. And one of the things that this bot tries to do, so when a spammy publisher rents out a botnet powered by verrine, they actually want to have a lot of time spent on their page. So this bot will move around programmatically, generate some behavior, and then click on links on the page. And it's trying to click on this way of randomly generating clicks and randomly generating page views on internal links. That's a way of effectively randomizing the visit, right? Because the user might be on this site for 10 pages. They might be on this site for 1 page view. One thing you'll notice here is when verrine is controlling IE, verrine actually scrolls on the page. So when I talked about behavioral metrics being gamed, you can see this in action here, that things like scroll depth aren't an indicator of engagement with an ad. The bots will actually game that activity as soon as we start rewarding it with programmatic ad buying that tries to use these behavioral metrics to increase the price of ads. One thing you'll notice here is this characteristic motion. This is the mouse motion on the page. And so it's actually very hard to program mouse behavior that looks like normal mouse behavior. We don't move in a straight line. We'll go on to discussing other types of fraud besides just simple bot traffic. One category we've identified is volunteer bots. This is where a user downloads software that basically they relinquish control over their web browser. And ostensibly, these are the way traffic exchanges work is that you own a website. You want to get views for your website. So you load this engine or application onto your computer, and it loads web pages in the background. And the idea is you're trading one view of someone's website for a view on your website. Now, what ends up happening is that the reason this is, these aren't very engaged humans. They're not particularly interested in any of this content, and it's often being loaded in the background while they're not looking at it. So they're basically volunteering to make their computer a botnet so they can drive up views on their own websites. Another type of ad fraud is ad stacking. These are where ads are loaded on top of each other. So see, here in the browser, we actually have the ad that is actually shown. That would be the red ad. And there's actually 7 ads underneath that one ad. Another form of fraud that's related is pixel stuffing. So this is where a web page might be loaded in a 1x1 iframe on another web page. And the way this often works is that a publisher might have one website that's brand safe, really high quality, gets some real traffic, and they get a good pub ID, a good advertising publisher account. And then they take that website and load it inside a bunch of shady websites where they generate fraudulent traffic to. And this is a way of driving up revenue from premium ads and showing them basically on a different website or obfuscating their usage. So one other form of fraud is location fraud. So if you're launching a service or trying to market a service in New York, you don't want your user to actually be in San Francisco. You don't want your user to be in Brazil because your advertising will not be effective. This most often affects mobile. And so in mobile, what we see is actually spoofed latitude, longitude data for the user's location. One other form of fraud is domain spoofing. This is where the actual URL that the advertisement was displayed on is being misdeclared. So this is another example where a publisher might be using their pub ID from their brand safe, totally great website on non-brand safe, shady websites that they also run. Finally, we have incentivized browsing. This is where a user gets some nominal payout for viewing a video, answering a survey, or clicking on an ad. And this is a case where this is a sort of gray area. There is an actual human involved, but we don't think they have any purchase intent in any of the products or ads that they're viewing. So what I work on at IAS is how we actually detect fraud. And there are 3 core pillars of detection. So first, there's behavioral network analysis. Here we're analyzing how bots behave across many web pages and on an individual web page. Second, we have browser and device analysis. Here we're looking for anomalies to verify, to identify bots. And we're trying to identify them because they're misdeclaring what browser they are, or they're misdeclaring what device they are. So we try to verify that if the ad impression is being shown to a user whose user agent says they're Mac OS X 10.10 Chrome 53, we verify they actually are running on a Mac. We verify they are actually running Chrome 53. Then finally, we also do what Dave will talk about next, which is basically we do our own intelligence gathering about how fraudsters make money and the software and malware they use in order to generate fraudulent traffic. So if we take apart this malware code, we can figure out how the bot browser might traverse a page, like we saw verrine moving in a straight line. And we might also figure out what websites or what patterns are used to generate traffic from this type of botnet. An example of behavioral network analysis is identifying the types of patterns that I mentioned earlier. So a bot visits an e-commerce website to acquire retargeting cookies. It visits the Wall Street Journal and The Economist in order to be demographically targeted as a high-income user, right? Because the readers of those publications are generally high income, so bots will want to be demographically targeted as a rich person who is likely to buy your product. Then they'll go visit a publisher website and they'll make money from either CPM or CPC ads. Now, there's varying degrees of sophistication here. And so in some cases, right, this is actually a circuit. This is a circle. So the bots might actually figure out what the frequency cap is for a retargeting campaign, then delete their cookies and go back to the e-commerce site and do it again. So there's varying degrees of sophistication and revenue optimization from these bots. One other way we have of detecting bots, as we mentioned earlier and demonstrated in the verrine video, is looking for irregular behavior or signs of automated behavior. So back at my company Swarm, we were required at IAS, we actually paid 50,000 users, 50,000 humans, to try to move a mouse in a straight line. And the furthest we could get a user to move a mouse in a straight line is about 200 pixels. And so we actually built models of how humans use a mouse. And so what we're looking for here is a certain degree of entropy and efficiency. Humans are not completely random, but they're not super efficient. They don't move lightning speeds in a straight line from point A to B either. So that's how we identify non-human behavior on a page. One other way that we identify bots is looking for browser anomalies. So here we're trying to verify that the user's actual browser environment corresponds to the browser stated in the user agent. And what we're trying to do here, in most cases, we're not trying to identify where a browser is misdeclared. We're trying to identify bot browsers that are masquerading as normal human browsers. So the same open source rendering engines that Chrome and Firefox are built on top of are also used by fraudsters to build their own DIY bot browsers. What we've seen is near exact replicas of Chrome. So, what we're often doing here is basically distinguishing between real Chrome and fake Chrome. In one particular example of that fake Chrome, the fraudsters were so good at implementing their own DIY version of Chrome that was optimized for generating tons of web traffic, except they forgot to implement the Chrome plugin and extension store, which we test for, because they didn't think the bots would ever need to install plugins. One other form of anomaly detection we do is identifying device anomalies. So when you think about a smartphone, right? The iPhone does not have device fragmentation like Android. So there's a fixed aspect ratio for every single iOS device. And so if we see a user agent say the user is on an iPhone, we know that the screen should match certain dimensions. We know that the pixel depth should be a certain pixel depth because there's a retina display on the phone. We know that there should be a certain amount of CPU cores running on the device as well. And so here we look for anomalies to verify that it's actually a real device viewing the ad. Finally, the last thing we do is we actually decompile malware and take it apart. And the purpose of this is to identify how fraudulent traffic is generated. So if we take apart the source code of some of this malware, we can identify how it's actually generating mouse motion. So for example, a bot might move 10 degrees in the x-axis, 10 degrees in the y-axis between every mouse move. Or it might visit websites using a particular randomization schema. So getting deep into how the fraudsters are actually committing ad fraud is our sort of our most sophisticated line of defense. Here we're trying to stay ahead of the game and identify botnets and how they generate fraudulent traffic before they actually start making tons of money. And this involves reconnaissance in some cases, where we have to have our ears on the ground and be constantly reading underground hacker forums in order to find out about the latest and greatest in malware, which Dave will talk about with you.
All right. Thanks, Greg.